How's it going, guys? I'm Theo Joe, and here we have the new iPhone SE 2nd generation, and we're going to be doing a review, specifically a classic ruthless review where I don't hold anything back. If there's something awesome about it, I'll tell you. If something sucks about it, I'll tell you that too. Though, spoiler alert, there's not too much that I don't like about this phone, especially considering the price. There are some things that I really wish they had included. We'll go over that, but we'll go over a lot of other stuff too, like comparisons with the iPhone 8, which is what this is kind of based on. Also, the most recent iPhone 11 Pro that I have, so we'll go over a lot of aspects about this phone. Now, if you know anything about this phone, you probably realize that the price is one of the main selling points. So starting at just $399 for the 64GB model, that's pretty darn good for an iPhone. For the next leg up, 128GB, it's an extra $50 at $449, and then for the 256, it's $549. And in the days of $1,000 flagship phones, $400 doesn't really sound too bad, but you also have to consider what kind of power, what kind of bang for your buck do you get for that $400, because if it's a cheap phone that also sucks, well, that's not too good. But with this, you actually do get quite a bit for your money. So why don't we start off just overall looking at the phone. There's a lot that you probably recognize because this is basically a revamped iPhone 8. It's got the small form factor you've seen before in the past phones, so it's just 4.7 inches, it's an LCD screen. The screen resolution, not too high, it's just over 720p, specifically 1334 by 750. It's about 326 pixels per inch. The camera, it's a single camera on the back, 12 megapixels, but it is a slightly improved camera compared to the 8, and we'll take a look at that later, especially considering it has smart HDR, which you'll see makes a huge difference. Clearly there is no notch, so therefore there is no Face ID, it's just a fingerprint sensor, bringing that back. I am a personal fan of the fingerprint sensor over Face ID, so that's one good thing for me. There's only a few colors, black, white, and red. I got the white version, so you see the glossy glass back is white, but on the front, one noticeable difference between the 8 and this is with the SE, no matter what color you get, it's always gonna be black on the front. So I guess that sort of hides the huge bezels when it's off at least, but you can't obviously hide them when it's on. However, even though a lot of that's the same, the biggest upgrade is definitely the processor on the inside. The iPhone SE uses the A13 Bionic chip, which is the same exact CPU that's in current gen flagship iPhones, namely the iPhone 11, the 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max. You're getting the same one, except in a phone that's basically half the price. And to make sure the actual processing power is the same, I did run a couple benchmarks between my iPhone 11 Pro and the SE. So I did Geekbench for the CPU, and you can see the scores between the single core and multi-core between both of them are pretty much exactly the same. The SE is 1330 for single core, iPhone 11 Pro is 1328, multi-core is 3309 and 3326. Basically the same. I also did a GPU comparison between the two. This is where things differ a little bit. So for this, I did the 3D Mark Slingshot Extreme benchmark. And here the iPhone SE scored 4012, whereas the 11 Pro scored 5262. So it is about 24% less powerful on the GPU side compared to the iPhone 11 Pro. However, remember that this was running the benchmark at the same resolution. The benchmark test was at like 1440p. However, in the real world, if you're actually running an application, the SE has about 1/3 the number of pixels as the iPhone 11 Pro. So in an actual application, it's not gonna have to use as much processing power to really get the same performance. So in terms of like FPS in running a game or something, it should be just as good, or if not better, than the iPhone 11 Pro. In my estimation, it should be. Now, to put this kind of power in perspective, the most powerful Android processor on the market right now is the Snapdragon 865. Now, obviously, there might be a new version of that coming out soon, but right now, that's what it is. And benchmarks have shown that the A13 Bionic has at least perform the same, if not outperform slightly, the Snapdragon 865. In other words, at the moment, the cheapest iPhone at just $400 can outperform even the most expensive, most powerful Android phone flagships at the top of their line. And that right there is what you'd call a bruh moment for Android. All right, now next up, I wanted to test out the camera, so I stacked it up against two other phones, which again are the iPhone 11 Pro, that's the current, one of the flagships, as well as the old iPhone 8 Plus. And for this test, I basically took pictures of a bookshelf. I put some lights on some of the shelves and a lamp on the top is on so you can test out some of the dynamic range. And I did it in 3 different scenarios. One with very good bright lighting, like I took some studio lights, put it right next to it, so it should be extremely bright. Another one is just basic average interior lighting, no studio lights, just basically what my apartment was looking like in general, and then also low light. So I turned off most of the lights and then also closed the windows so there's no extra light coming in, so it's just bad light lighting in the third scenario. So the first situation with very good lighting, not really surprised, they all really performed very similarly. The only difference is the iPhone 8 Plus, which had some trouble with direct light sources, like with the lamp, it definitely blew out a little bit more than the iPhone 11 Pro and the SE, and that's because the SE and the Pro both have the Smart HDR function, which the iPhone 8 Plus did not have. All right, now the next scenario is basically medium light, and this is where things start to get a little bit more interesting. The SE does seem to have pretty similar quality to the 11 Pro, even in this scenario, but it does seem to drop off in sharpness at the edges. Like you can see, the bottom plant definitely blotchier with the SE, whereas the 11 Pro can definitely hold more details in that. It's pretty obvious. But when you compare it to the iPhone 8 Plus, the SE clearly has far superior dynamic range capabilities. Obviously, being a direct light source on the SE, the light bulb itself is pretty blown out, but on the 8 Plus, it's even more blown out. It's starting to engulf the whole lamp, so it doesn't really hold any of the details on any kind of direct light source when in lower light, because it has to bring up the brightness of everything else, so any direct light is not going to look great. And then finally, with bad lighting, when we compare the SE to the 8 Plus, I would definitely say it's clearly superior to the 8 Plus. There's noticeably better colors, it might be a little bit brighter, and has better sharpness, especially near the edges of the frame. And here, again, the dynamic range is just far superior to the 8 Plus. It's basically the same or similar dynamic range to the 11 Pro. For example, you can see pretty much the entire detail of the lamp shade. It's not really a shade, it's glass, but you can see it all. You can see the little bubbles in it. Whereas with the 8 Plus, basically the entire lamp is pretty much blown out. There's no details in there at all. It just looks like crap. I'd say the SE is almost on par with the iPhone 11 Pro, which definitely is sharper in some places, but you know, it's not bad. Now, one thing to keep in mind is the 8 Plus does have an auto HDR feature, which is different from Smart HDR, and all these test photos were taken with the 8 Plus with auto HDR off. However, we see if we turn the auto HDR on, even in the low light situation, it really doesn't help anything. The lamp is still completely blown out. It doesn't really make things look great. Clearly, Smart HDR is far superior to any auto HDR that was in the 8 Plus. I don't even think that really did anything. Now, one unfortunate thing I do need to remind you of is that the iPhone SE does not have any kind of night mode feature, whereas the newer iPhones do. And this is a huge bummer because this means the iPhone SE is going to have a huge disadvantage in most low light situations. The test photos you saw before with the low light were not used with night mode on the 11 Pro, so I did take a picture with night mode to compare it to the other pictures, and you can see with the night mode there's clearly less noise when you zoom in, and it does have an even further improved dynamic range. For example, with the side of the plant, it's not blown out at all. You can actually see the detail of the little pot, whereas on the regular non-night mode, that's completely blown out on both the SE and even the 11 Pro with no night mode. And I am kind of disappointed that Apple did not put night mode into the SE. I don't know if they did it because there's an actual hardware limitation. You would think with the A13 Bionic that it would be possible, so I'm really hoping they didn't just artificially keep that feature out to avoid cannibalizing maybe the iPhone 11, for example. They could have done that, I wouldn't put it past them, but it does kind of suck that it does not have the night mode. So anyway, let's move on to some other comparisons. So the next one I wanted to look at is the screen brightness. So I compared again the SE to the 8 Plus and the 11 Pro. So for this, I turned all of them to full brightness. I turned off True Tone Display in case that affected anything, and I just took a white square, the same white square image, and maximized it on the screen. And then I used the light meter to measure different parts of the screen, but took a final measurement in the middle for the brightness. And you can see the results. The 8 Plus had a brightness of 520 lux, the SE had a brightness of 600 lux, and the 11 Pro was at 970 lux. Now, lux is a different unit than nits, so you can't really compare it to that. You basically just compare it between these two relatively, but still it does show that the SE does have a brighter screen, a little bit at least, compared to the 8 Plus, and then obviously not nearly as bright as with the 11 Pro. So basically, it seems like the iPhone SE gained a lot of features over the 8, but really hasn't lost too many. Now, one it did lose, for example, is no more 3D touch. It's just the long press again, but that is the same with even the flagship 11 and 11 Pro. The 3D touch was just removed completely, so that's no change here. But besides that, it does really have pretty much the same features as the 8, so it has that dual SIM / eSIM, and another example is it still has fast charging capability and wireless charging, so you can use up to like 18-watt fast charge if you want, so definitely pick one of those up instead of just using the tiny little 5-watt charger that comes in the box. It also apparently has the same battery capacity as the iPhone 8 at about 1821 milliamp hours. Based on how long I used the phone, it was really hard for me to say and make a judgment on the actual battery life. It seems like the consensus is that it's decent for iPhone battery life, pretty much typical what you would expect. Not amazing, not as great as like the iPhone 11 Pro, but you will drain battery life very quickly if you're using very processor intensive games or something like that, because basically you're getting the same battery capacity as the 8, but you're putting in a much more power hungry processor. So definitely don't expect as much battery life as one of the flagships. So anyway, my overall thoughts are that in this case with the iPhone SE, Apple really did pull off an awesome budget iPhone. Is it enough to get people who are happy with their Android flagship to switch over? I highly doubt it, almost definitely not. But if you're someone who's been sticking with budget Android phones and you've been wanting an iPhone for a long time, you just couldn't really afford it, well, this is probably your best chance. Now, if you already have an iPhone 8 and you're trying to decide whether or not to get it, I don't know. If you are happy with the performance of your iPhone 8, there's not really too much more with the SE, though the price definitely is way easier to justify than compared to going to the iPhone 11 Pro or the 11, but with those, you definitely would get more features. Now, if you're on an even older phone, like a 7 or earlier, I'd be willing to bet your phone is starting to show some serious age. So in that case, if you've been just holding off upgrading because you don't want to spend the money at all, then I would just bite the bullet and upgrade to this one. It's probably the best budget phone you're gonna get in terms of iPhones, and now you have a chance to get it right when it comes out, and it's still gonna be the most powerful relatively to the other phones on the market. So my overall thought is, if you've been waiting for a budget iPhone, this is definitely not one to disappoint. You're getting basically a flagship CPU in there. Maybe the camera isn't as amazing without night mode, but still, it's a budget iPhone, and you probably won't be disappointed if you're used to using budget phones anyway. And so I guess that's pretty much it. If you guys want to keep watching, the next video I would recommend is my review of the iPhone 11 Pro. So I made that several months ago when that one came out. So definitely check that out. You can just click that video right there. So thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm looking forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you in the next video.